8-year-old Emma Thompson sat on her small bed, watching her father through the crack in her bedroom door. James was at the kitchen table again just like every night. Papers covered the wooden surface. Some had bright red letters that Emma could not read very well, but she knew they made her daddy sad. Emma did not understand grown-up words like bills, or overdue, or final notice. But she could see how her father's shoulders dropped when he looked at those papers. She could see how he rubbed his forehead with his rough hands. She could hear him sigh deeply, the kind of sigh that sounded like all the air was leaving his body. James worked at the big factory on the edge of town. Every morning before the sun came up, he would kiss Emma's sleeping forehead and whisper, "Be good for Mummy." Then he would walk to the bus stop in his old work boots, carrying his lunch in a paper bag that Margaret had packed for him. Margaret, Emma's mother, stayed home to take care of Emma and baby Tom. Tom was only 2 years old and needed lots of attention. He was always crying or needing his diaper changed or wanting to be fed. Margaret loved him very much, but Emma could see that taking care of a baby was very hard work. Their house was small. Emma's bedroom was so tiny that when she stretched her arms out, she could almost touch both walls. The kitchen was where the family spent most of their time. It had an old refrigerator that made funny noises, a stove with only 3 working burners, and the wooden table where James sat every night with his worrying papers. Emma loved her family more than anything in the whole world. She loved how her mother sang silly songs while she cooked dinner. She loved how baby Tom clapped his hands when she made funny faces at him. But most of all, she loved her father. James was the kindest man Emma knew. Even when he was tired from working all day, he would always make time for her. He would help her with her letters and numbers. He would listen to her talk about her day at school. He would tell her stories about brave princesses and friendly dragons. Every night, no matter how late he stayed up worrying about those papers, James would come to Emma's room. He would sit on the edge of her little bed and read from her favorite book about a rabbit who went on adventures. His voice was deep and warm, and it made Emma feel safe and loved. After the story, James would tuck the blankets around Emma very carefully. He would kiss her forehead and say, "Sleep tight, my little artist." Emma loved it when he called her that. It made her feel special and important. Emma was good at drawing. At school, her teacher Mrs. Brown always praised her pictures. "Emma has a real talent," Mrs. Brown would tell the other children. Emma would beam with pride and could not wait to go home and tell her father about the compliment. One evening, Emma was lying in bed listening to her parents talk in the kitchen. She could hear worry in their voices even though they were trying to whisper. "I do not know how we are going to pay the rent this month," James said quietly. "We will find a way," Margaret replied. "We always do. But what if we do not? What if we lose the house? What will happen to Emma and Tom?" Emma felt scared. She did not want to lose their little house. Where would they live? Where would she keep her toys and her books? The next morning, Emma made a decision. She had been saving her pocket money in a little tin box under her bed. Every week, her grandmother gave her 50 pence when she visited. Emma usually spent it on sweets at the corner shop, but this week she had an idea. She counted her money carefully. £2.50. It was not very much, but it was all she had. After school, Emma walked to Mr. Peterson's corner shop. The old man smiled at her from behind the counter. "What will it be today, Emma?" "The usual packet of gummy bears." Emma shook her head. "No, Mr. Peterson. I want to buy some colored pencils, please." Mr. Peterson looked surprised but showed Emma the art supplies. She chose a box of 12 colored pencils. They were not the fancy ones, but they would do perfectly for her plan. For the next 3 days, Emma worked on her secret project. She sat at the kitchen table after dinner while her mother washed dishes and her father helped Tom with his blocks. Very carefully she drew her family. There was herself with her long brown hair and pigtails. There was baby Tom with his chubby cheeks and big smile. There was Margaret with her kind eyes and the apron she always wore when cooking. And there was James, tall and strong, with his work clothes and his gentle face. Behind the family, Emma drew the most beautiful house she could imagine. It had a bright red roof, sunny yellow walls, and a garden full of colorful flowers. There were trees with green leaves and a blue sky with fluffy white clouds. At the top of the paper, Emma wrote in her very best handwriting, "Best Dad in the World." On Sunday morning, Emma could barely contain her excitement. She found her father in the kitchen, drinking his morning tea and reading the newspaper. "Daddy, I have something for you," she announced, running to him with the drawing hidden behind her back. James smiled and put down his newspaper. "What is it, my little artist?" Emma proudly presented her drawing. James took it in his hands and stared at it for a long moment. Emma watched as tears began to fill his eyes. "Oh, Emma," he whispered. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." He picked her up in his strong arms and held her tight against his chest. Emma could feel his heart beating fast. She could feel how much he loved her in that hug. James carefully pinned the drawing to the refrigerator door, right in the center where everyone who came into the kitchen would see it. That night, Emma heard her parents talking again. But this time their voices sounded different. They sounded hopeful. "Look at what our daughter made," James said to Margaret. "She believes in me even when I do not believe in myself." "She loves you so much," Margaret replied. "We both do." "I am going to work harder than ever," James said. "I am going to make sure that little girl gets everything she deserves in life." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. She had given her father the best gift she could think of, and somehow it had made everything feel better. Even though their house was small and money was tight, Emma knew that they had something more valuable than anything else in the world. They had love. 8-year-old Emma Thompson sat on her small bed, watching her father through the crack in her bedroom door. James was at the kitchen table again just like every night. Papers covered the wooden surface. Some had bright red letters that Emma could not read very well, but she knew they made her daddy sad. Emma did not understand grown-up words like bills, or overdue, or final notice. But she could see how her father's shoulders dropped when he looked at those papers. She could see how he rubbed his forehead with his rough hands. She could hear him sigh deeply, the kind of sigh that sounded like all the air was leaving his body. James worked at the big factory on the edge of town. Every morning before the sun came up, he would kiss Emma's sleeping forehead and whisper, "Be good for Mummy." Then he would walk to the bus stop in his old work boots, carrying his lunch in a paper bag that Margaret had packed for him. Margaret, Emma's mother, stayed home to take care of Emma and baby Tom. Tom was only 2 years old and needed lots of attention. He was always crying or needing his diaper changed or wanting to be fed. Margaret loved him very much, but Emma could see that taking care of a baby was very hard work. Their house was small. Emma's bedroom was so tiny that when she stretched her arms out, she could almost touch both walls. The kitchen was where the family spent most of their time. It had an old refrigerator that made funny noises, a stove with only 3 working burners, and the wooden table where James sat every night with his worrying papers. Emma loved her family more than anything in the whole world. She loved how her mother sang silly songs while she cooked dinner. She loved how baby Tom clapped his hands when she made funny faces at him. But most of all, she loved her father. James was the kindest man Emma knew. Even when he was tired from working all day, he would always make time for her. He would help her with her letters and numbers. He would listen to her talk about her day at school. He would tell her stories about brave princesses and friendly dragons. Every night, no matter how late he stayed up worrying about those papers, James would come to Emma's room. He would sit on the edge of her little bed and read from her favorite book about a rabbit who went on adventures. His voice was deep and warm, and it made Emma feel safe and loved. After the story, James would tuck the blankets around Emma very carefully. He would kiss her forehead and say, "Sleep tight, my little artist." Emma loved it when he called her that. It made her feel special and important. Emma was good at drawing. At school, her teacher Mrs. Brown always praised her pictures. "Emma has a real talent," Mrs. Brown would tell the other children. Emma would beam with pride and could not wait to go home and tell her father about the compliment. One evening, Emma was lying in bed listening to her parents talk in the kitchen. She could hear worry in their voices even though they were trying to whisper. "I do not know how we are going to pay the rent this month," James said quietly. "We will find a way," Margaret replied. "We always do. But what if we do not? What if we lose the house? What will happen to Emma and Tom?" Emma felt scared. She did not want to lose their little house. Where would they live? Where would she keep her toys and her books? The next morning, Emma made a decision. She had been saving her pocket money in a little tin box under her bed. Every week, her grandmother gave her 50 pence when she visited. Emma usually spent it on sweets at the corner shop, but this week she had an idea. She counted her money carefully. £2.50. It was not very much, but it was all she had. After school, Emma walked to Mr. Peterson's corner shop. The old man smiled at her from behind the counter. "What will it be today, Emma?" "The usual packet of gummy bears." Emma shook her head. "No, Mr. Peterson. I want to buy some colored pencils, please." Mr. Peterson looked surprised but showed Emma the art supplies. She chose a box of 12 colored pencils. They were not the fancy ones, but they would do perfectly for her plan. For the next 3 days, Emma worked on her secret project. She sat at the kitchen table after dinner while her mother washed dishes and her father helped Tom with his blocks.
2 years had passed
Very
since
carefully
Emma made
she
that
drew her
special
family.
drawing for her father.
There was herself
She
with
was
her
now
long
10
brown
years
hair
old,
and pigtails.
and life had become very
There was
different
baby
for the
Tom with
Thompson
his chubby
family.
cheeks and big
The happy
smile.
times seemed like
There
a
was
distant
Margaret
memory,
with her kind eyes
replaced
and
by
the apron
worry
she
and
always
fear
wore
that
when
grew
cooking.
stronger each day.
And there was James,
The trouble
tall and
started
strong,
on a cold
with his
Tuesday
work
morning
clothes
in
and
his
gentle
February.
face.
James
Behind
came
the
home from
family,
work earlier
Emma
than
drew
usual.
the most beautiful house
Emma was
she
doing
could
her
imagine.
homework at the kitchen
It had a
table when
bright
she
red
heard
roof,
the front
sunny
door
yellow
open.
walls, and a
Her
garden
father
full
walked
of
in
colorful
slowly,
flowers.
his face
There
pale
were
and his
trees with
shoulders
green
slumped.
leaves and a blue
He was
sky
carrying
with
a small
fluffy white
cardboard
clouds.
box with his things
At the
from
top
work.
of the paper,
Margaret
Emma
wrote
wrote
in
in
her
her
very
feeding
best
baby
handwriting,
Tom,
now 2
best
years
dad
old
in
and
the
walking
world.
around on wobbly
On Sunday
legs.
morning,
Emma
James,
could barely
what are you
contain
doing
her
home
excitement.
so early?
She found
James
her father
sat down
in the
heavily
kitchen,
in his chair
drinking
and put
his
his head
morning
in his
tea and
hands.
reading the newspaper.
The factory is closing,
Daddy,
Margaret.
I have something for
They
you,
told us this
she
morning.
announced, running
All
to
of
him
us.
with the drawing hidden
300
behind her
people.
back. We are all
James
losing
smiled
our
and
jobs.
put down his newspaper.
Emma did not understand
What is it,
everything
my little
her father
artist?
said, but
Emma
she knew it was
proudly
something
presented her
terrible.
drawing.
She watched
James
as her
took it in
mother's
his
hands
face
and
went
stared
white.
at it for a long
The
moment.
spoon in Margaret's
Emma
hand
watched
started
as tears
shaking.
began to fill
But
his
you
eyes.
have worked there for 15
Emma,
years,
he
Margaret
whispered.
This is the
They
most
cannot
beautiful
just close
thing anyone
down.
has ever given
They
me.
can and they have.
He picked her
James
up in his
replied.
strong arms and
His
held her
voice
tight
sounded
against
hollow
his
and
chest.
tired.
Emma
The
could
company
feel his
is
heart
moving their
beating
work
fast.
to another
She
country
could
where
feel
they
how
can
much
pay
he loved
workers
her in
less
that
money.
hug.
We have
James
2 weeks
carefully
to clear
pinned
out
the
our
drawing
desks.
to the refrigerator
That
door.
night,
Emma
right in
lay
the
in
center
her
where
bed
everyone
listening
who
to
came
her
into the
parents
kitchen
talk in
would see
worried
it.
voices.
That night,
They thought she
Emma
was
heard
asleep,
her parents
but she
talking
could hear
again.
every word
But this
through the
time
thin
their
walls of
voices
their
sounded
small
different.
house. They
What are we
sounded
going
hopeful.
to do? Look at
Margaret
what our
asked.
daughter made.
How will we
James
pay
said
the
to
rent?
Margaret. How will we
She
buy food
believes
for
in
the
me
children?
even when I do not
I will
believe in
find another
myself.
job.
James
She
said,
loves you
but
so
he did
much,
not sound sure.
Margaret replied.
I have to find
We
another
both
job.
do. The
I am
next
going
morning,
to work harder
James
than
put
ever,
on his best
James
shirt
said.
and trousers.
I am going to make
He
sure
combed
that
his
little
hair
girl
carefully
gets
and
everything
polished
she
his old
deserves
black
in
shoes
life.
until they shone.
Emma smiled
Then
and
he
closed
walked
her
out
eyes.
into the cold morning
She had
air
given
to
her
look for
father
work.
the best gift she
Day
could
after
think
day,
of,
James
and
walked
somehow
through
it
the
had made
town.
everything feel
He
better.
went to every shop,
Even though their
every
house
office,
was small and
every
money was
business he
tight,
could find.
Emma knew that they
He
had
knocked on
something
doors
more
and filled
valuable
out
than
forms.
anything else in the world.
He waited in long
They had
lines
love.
with other men who had also lost their jobs. Everyone was looking for work, but there were not enough jobs for everyone. Emma watched her father come home each evening with slumped shoulders and tired eyes. His shirt would be wrinkled from walking all day. His shoes would be dusty from the streets. And always, he would shake his head when Margaret asked if he had found anything. Maybe tomorrow, he would say quietly. But tomorrow came and went and still there was no job. The bills started piling up on the kitchen table. The red letters came more often now. Margaret would hide them from Emma, but Emma could see them anyway. She could see how her mother's hands shook when she opened the envelopes. Margaret tried to help by taking in washing from their neighbors. She would scrub clothes by hand in their tiny bathroom and hang them on lines stretched across their small garden. Her hands became red and rough from the soap and cold water. She worked from morning until night, but the money she earned was not enough. Emma noticed that her parents stopped smiling. They stopped laughing at Tom's silly games. They stopped reading bedtime stories. Instead, they whispered to each other in corners, their faces full of worry. Sometimes Emma would find her mother crying quietly in the bathroom. Margaret would quickly wipe her eyes and pretend everything was fine, but Emma could see the sadness in her face. Her father became like a stranger. He would sit by the window for hours, staring out at the street but not really seeing anything. When Emma tried to talk to him, he would answer with just 1 or 2 words. The man who used to call her "my little artist" seemed to have disappeared. The worst day came on a rainy Thursday morning. Emma was getting ready for school when someone knocked loudly on their front door. Margaret opened it to find a man in a dark suit holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Thompson?" the man said. "I have an official notice for you." Emma watched from the hallway as the man handed her mother a white envelope. Margaret's hands trembled as she took it. After the man left, Margaret sat down at the kitchen table and opened the letter. Emma heard her mother gasp. Then she heard a word that Emma did not understand but knew was terrible: eviction. That evening, Margaret sat Emma down on the old sofa in their tiny living room. Tom was playing with his blocks on the floor, not understanding that their world was about to change. "Emma, sweetheart," Margaret said gently, "we have to move out of our house. We cannot live here anymore." Emma felt like ice water had been poured into her stomach. "Why, Mummy? I like our house. I like my room." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "We cannot pay the rent anymore, darling. The man who owns this house needs us to leave so someone else can live here." "But where will we go?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. "We will find somewhere," Margaret said, but she did not sound sure. The next few days were like living in a nightmare. Boxes appeared everywhere in their small house. Emma watched as her toys, her clothes, her books, everything she owned,
disappeared into cardboard containers. The walls looked strange and empty without their pictures and decorations. Margaret packed frantically, trying to fit their whole life into boxes and bags. James carried the heavy things to their old car, making trip after trip. Everyone was rushing and stressed and scared. In all the confusion, something terrible happened. Emma was looking for her favorite book when she realized she could not find her special drawing. The one she had made for her father 2 years ago. The one that had hung proudly on their refrigerator door. Emma searched through every box, every bag, every corner of the house. She looked under beds and behind furniture. She checked the car and the garden shed. But the drawing was nowhere to be found. "Dad, I cannot find my drawing," Emma cried, running to where James was loading the car. James was carrying a heavy box, sweat running down his face despite the cold weather. He looked tired and angry and scared all at once. "Not now, Emma," he said sharply, not even looking at her. "We have to hurry. We have to be out of here by tonight." Emma felt her heart break into pieces. The drawing that had meant so much to her father, the one that had made him cry happy tears, was lost. And he did not even care. They moved to a tiny flat on the other side of town. It had 2 small rooms, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a bathroom with a leaky tap. The walls were thin and Emma could hear their neighbors arguing next door. Everything was different now. Emma had to change schools and leave all her friends behind. The new school was bigger and scarier, and Emma did not know anyone. She sat alone at lunch and walked home by herself every day. Worst of all, her father seemed to have forgotten how to smile. He no longer called her, "my little artist." He no longer read bedtime stories or tucked her in at night. It was as if the loving father she had known had disappeared along with their old life. Emma lay in her new bed in the strange flat, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of their new neighborhood. She missed her old room, her old school, her old life. But most of all, she missed her father's smile and the way he used to make her feel special and loved. Everything had fallen apart and Emma did not know. The years that followed the move were the most difficult Emma had ever known. She watched her childhood disappear as her family struggled to survive in their new life. Everything had changed and nothing felt safe or comfortable anymore. James became like a ghost in their tiny flat. He took any job he could find, no matter how hard or how little it paid. In the early morning hours before the sun came up, Emma would hear him leaving to deliver newspapers. His footsteps were quiet in the hallway, but she always heard the front door close softly behind him. During the day, James worked at a warehouse lifting heavy boxes and loading trucks. His back ached constantly, and his hands became rough and scarred from the work. When evening came, instead of coming home to rest, he would eat a quick dinner and then leave again to clean offices in the tall buildings downtown. Emma would lie in bed at night, listening for the sound of her father's key in the door. Sometimes he did not come home until after midnight. Sometimes she did not see him for 3 whole days because he was always either working or sleeping. Margaret found work at a small shop on the corner. She sold newspapers, cigarettes, and sweets to people from the neighborhood. The shop owner, Mr. Davies, was not very kind. He made Margaret work long hours for very little money, and he would shout at her if she made even small mistakes. Emma's mother would leave for work early in the morning and not come home until late at night. Her feet hurt from standing all day, and her hands smelled like the cleaning products she used to wipe down the counters and shelves. With both parents working so much, Emma had to grow up very quickly. Tom was now 4 years old and he needed someone to take care of him. Emma became like a second mother to her little brother. Every morning, Emma would wake Tom up and help him get dressed for nursery school. She would make him breakfast, usually toast with jam or a bowl of cereal. She would pack his little backpack and walk him to the nursery school building, even though it made her late for her own classes. After school, Emma would pick Tom up and bring him home. She would help him with his letters and numbers, read him stories and play simple games with him. When Tom was hungry, Emma would cook dinner for both of them. She learned to make pasta, sandwiches, and simple soups. Emma missed her old life terribly. She missed living in their little house with the garden. She missed her old friends from school. Most of all, she missed the father who used to smile and call her, "my little artist." That man seemed to have disappeared completely. The James who lived with them now was always tired, always worried, always stressed. When he did talk, it was usually about money. "We need to save every penny," he would say. "We cannot afford anything extra." He never asked Emma about school or her drawings. He never told her stories or tucked her into bed. At her new school, Emma felt like she did not belong. The other children wore nice clothes and carried expensive school bags. They had new books and fancy pens. Emma wore the same 3 outfits every week because that was all she had. Her school bag was old and had a hole in one corner. Her pencils were broken and held together with tape. The other children lived in proper houses with gardens and their own bedrooms. Emma was too embarrassed to tell anyone that she lived in a tiny flat with thin walls where she could hear the neighbors shouting next door. She never invited anyone over because she was ashamed of how small and shabby their home was. During lunch break, while the other children played games and chatted with their friends, Emma would sit alone and eat the simple sandwiches she had made for herself that morning. She would watch the other children and wish she could be part of their easy, happy lives. But Emma remembered something very important from her childhood. She remembered the day she had given her father that special drawing. She remembered how his eyes had filled with tears of joy. She remembered how proud he had been to call her, "my little artist." Even though that drawing was lost and her father no longer seemed to see her talent, Emma knew that the love behind that moment was still real. Deep inside her heart, she still felt like an artist. Emma decided to throw herself into her schoolwork and her art. While other children spent their evenings watching television or playing video games, Emma studied. She read every book she could find in the school library. She practiced her math and her writing until she got perfect marks on all her tests. But it was art that truly saved Emma. When the world around her felt dark and hopeless, she would draw and paint pictures filled with light and beauty. She painted sunny gardens and happy families. She drew houses with red roofs and yellow walls, just like the one in her lost drawing. She painted scenes of people laughing and children playing. Her art teacher, Mrs. Wilson, noticed how hard Emma worked and how talented she was becoming. Mrs. Wilson was a kind woman with gray hair and paint-stained fingers who truly cared about her students. "Emma has a real gift," Mrs. Wilson told Margaret when she came to a parent meeting. "She should think about applying for the art scholarship at the university. With her talent and her hard work, I think she could get in." Emma had never thought about going to university. Her family had no money for such things. But Mrs. Wilson explained that scholarships were given to students who were very talented but could not afford to pay for school. From that day forward, Emma worked harder than ever. She spent every free moment drawing and painting. She created a portfolio of her best artwork. She stayed after school to use the art room supplies because she could not afford to buy her own. When other teenagers her age were thinking about parties and boyfriends, Emma was focused on her future. She knew that education and art were her way out of poverty. They were her chance to build a better life for herself and maybe even help her family. Years passed and Emma grew from a child into a young woman. She became the top student in her art class and one of the best students in her whole school. Teachers praised her dedication and talent. When Emma was 18 years old, she received wonderful news. She had won a full scholarship to study art at university. All her hard work had paid off. She would be able to go to university without her family having to pay anything. The night before Emma left for university, something magical happened. For the first time in many years, her father sat down with her in their tiny living room. Tom was asleep in his bed, and Margaret was washing dishes in the kitchen. James looked older than his years. His hair had gray streaks and lines of worry marked his face. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard physical work. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. I know I have not been a good father to you these past few years." Emma felt tears start to form in her eyes. She had waited so long to have a real conversation with her father. "I was so worried about keeping us alive, about paying the bills and putting food on the table, that I forgot how to live," James continued. "I forgot how to be the father you deserved." Emma reached out and took her father's rough, work-worn hands in her own smooth young hands. "Dad, you gave me everything that mattered. You taught me to work hard and never give up. You showed me that love." Emma stood in her bright London apartment, looking out at the busy street below. She watched her childhood disappear as her family struggled to survive in their new life. As a child. Everything had changed. She worked as a graphic designer for one of the biggest advertising companies in the city. James became like a ghost in their tiny flat. Her apartment had large windows, he took any job he could find, no matter how hard or how little she could cook whatever she wanted. In the early morning hours, every month before the sun came up, money home Emma would hear him leaving to deliver newspapers. It made her happy to know that she could help them now. His footsteps were quiet in the hallway, so hard to help her when she was young. The tiny flat where they had struggled for so many years was now just a memory. Lifting heavy boxes and loading trucks. To a small but comfortable house with a garden where Margaret and his hands became rough and scarred from the work. James had finally found steady work as a security guard at an office building in town. He would eat a quick dinner and then leave again to clean offices in the tall buildings downtown. But it paid regular money and gave him respect. Listening for the sound of her father's key in the normal hours. Sometimes he did not come home until after midnight and treated him with kindness. Sometimes she did not see him for 3 whole days because he was always either working or sleeping. She loved being surrounded by books and
helping
small shop
customers
on the
find
corner.
stories they would
She
enjoy.
sold newspapers,
The shop
cigarettes,
owner,
and
Mrs.
sweets
Morris,
to people from
was
the
kind
neighborhood.
and understanding.
The shop owner, Mr.
Margaret could
Davies,
sit down
was
when
not
her
very
feet hurt,
kind, and she was allowed
He
to
made
read during
Margaret
quiet
work long
times.
hours for very
Tom
little
was now
money,
15
and
years
he would
old
shout
and
at
doing
her if
very
she
well
made
in
even
school.
small mistakes.
He was tall and
Emma's mother
strong
would
with
leave
his
for
father's
work
gentle
early in the
eyes
morning
and his
and not
mother's
come
quick
home until
smile.
late at night.
Tom wanted to
Her
become a
feet hurt
teacher
from
someday,
standing all day,
and his grades
and
were
her
good
hands
enough to
smelled
make
like
that
the cleaning
dream
products
possible.
she used to wipe
Emma
down
was
the
very
counters
proud
and
of her
shelves.
little brother.
With both
Life
parents
was so
working
much
so much
better than it had
Emma
been during
had to
those
grow
dark
up very
years when
quickly.
Emma was growing up.
Tom was now 4
The
years
family
old,
had enough
and he
money
needed
for
someone
food
to
and
take
clothes.
care of him.
They could pay
Emma
their
became
bills
like
on
a
time.
second mother to
Tom
her
had
little
his own
brother.
bedroom and new
Every
school
morning,
supplies.
Emma would wake
Margaret
Tom up
could
and
buy
help him get
ingredients to
dressed
cook
for
proper
nursery
meals.
school.
But
She
even
would
with
make
all
him
this
breakfast,
happiness,
usually
Emma
toast with
felt like
jam or a
something
bowl
was
of
missing from
cereal.
her life.
She would pack
Deep
his
in
little
her heart,
backpack and
there
walk
was a
into the
sadness
nursery
that
school
never
building,
quite went away.
even though it made her
She
late
often
for her
thought
own
about
classes.
the drawing she had made
After
for her
school,
father when she
Emma
was
would
8
pick
years
Tom
old.
up and bring him home.
The drawing that had
She would
been
help
lost
him with his
during
letters
that
and
terrible
numbers,
time when they
read
had to
him
leave their
stories,
first
and
home.
play simple games
Emma
with
could
him.
still remember
When
every
Tom was
detail of
hungry,
that drawing.
Emma would cook
The
dinner
little
for
house
both
with
of
the
them.
red roof and
She
yellow
learned to make
walls.
pasta,
The stick
sandwiches,
figures
and
of her
simple
family
soups.
holding hands.
Emma missed her
The
old
garden
life
full of
terribly.
colorful flowers.
She missed living in their
And at
little
the
house
top,
with
in
the
her
garden.
child's handwriting,
She missed her
the
old
words
friends from
best
school.
dad in the world.
Most of all, she
That
missed
drawing
the
had
father who
meant
used to
everything to
smile
her
and
father.
call her my
She could
little
still
artist.
see the tears of
That
joy
man
in his
seemed to have
eyes when she
disappeared
had given it to
completely.
him.
The
She could
James
still
who lived
remember
with him
how
now was
carefully
always
he had
tired,
pinned it to the
always worried,
refrigerator
always
door.
stressed.
Losing
When
it
he
had
did
felt
talk,
like
it was
losing a
usually
piece of
about
their
money.
family's love.
We need to save
Sometimes
every penny,
Emma would try
he
to
would say.
recreate the drawing
We
from
cannot
memory.
afford anything
She was a
extra.
professional
He
artist
never
now
asked
with
Emma about
expensive
school or her
materials
drawings.
and perfect
He
technique.
never told her
But
stories
somehow
or
the
tucked
new
her into
drawings
bed.
never felt the
At
same.
her new school,
They were too
Emma
perfect,
felt like
too
she did not
polished.
belong.
They did not
The
have
other
the
children
innocent
wore
love
nice
of a
clothes
child
and
who
carried
believed her
expensive
father
school
was the
bags.
most wonderful
They
man
had
in
new
the
books
world.
and fancy pens.
One Tuesday
Emma
morning,
wore the
Emma
same
was
3
working at
outfits
her
every
computer
week
when her
because that was
phone
all
rang.
she had.
The
Her
collar
school
was a
bag
woman
was
with a
old and
kind
had a
voice
hole in
who
one
introduced
corner.
herself as
Her
Mrs.
pencils were
Henderson.
broken and held
I hope
together
you do
with
not
tape.
mind me calling.
The other children
Mrs.
lived
Henderson
in proper
said.
houses with
I got
gardens
your
and
number
their own
from
bedrooms.
directory assistants.
Emma was too
I bought a
embarrassed
house
to tell
about
anyone
10 years
that she
ago,
lived in a
and
tiny
we are
flat
finally
with
getting
thin
around
walls
to
where she could
renovating
hear
the
the neighbors
basement.
shouting next
We
door.
found a box of
She never
belongings that
invited
seemed to
anyone
belong
over
to a
because she
family
was
named
ashamed of
Thompson.
how small and
One of the
shabby their
papers
home
has the
was.
name James
During
Thompson
lunch
on
break,
it.
while the other
Emma's
children
heart
played
started
games
beating
and chatted
faster.
with their friends,
That is my
Emma would
father's
sit
name,
alone and
she
eat
said
the simple
quietly.
sandwiches she had
Oh,
made for
wonderful.
herself that morning.
Mrs. Henderson
She would watch
sounded
the other
pleased.
children and wish
We
she
were
could
not
be
sure
part
what
of their
to do with
easy,
these
happy
things.
lives.
The house is
But
on
Emma
Maple
remembered
Street,
something
number
very
42.
important from her
Does
childhood.
that sound familiar?
She remembered the day
Emma
she had
gasped.
given her father
That was their
special
old address.
drawing.
The
She
house where
remembered
she had
how
been
his
happy
eyes
as
had
a
filled
small
with
child.
tears of joy.
The house they had
She
been
remembered
forced to
how
leave when
proud he
everything
had been
went
to
wrong.
call her my
Yes,
little artist.
Emma said, her voice
Even though
shaking.
that drawing was
That
lost
was our
and her
house.
father no longer
We lived
seemed to
there
see
when
her
I was
talent.
little.
Emma
We
knew
almost
that the
threw
love
the box
behind that
away,
moment was still
Mrs.
real.
Henderson explained.
Deep inside her
But my
heart,
husband
she said
still
we should
felt
try
like
to
an
find a
artist.
family first.
Emma decided
These
to
look
throw
like
herself
important
into
family
her
memories.
schoolwork and her art.
Would you like to come
While
and
other
collect
children
them?
spent their
Emma could
evenings
barely
watching
speak.
television or
Yes,
playing
please.
video games,
I can come
Emma
this Saturday
studied.
if that is all
She
right
read
with
every
you.
book she could find in
Saturdays
the
seemed to
school
take
library.
forever to arrive.
She practiced her
Emma
math
could not
and her writing
concentrate
until
on
she
her
got
work.
perfect marks on
She
all
kept
her
thinking
tests.
about what might
But
be
it was
in that
art
box.
that truly saved
Old
Emma.
photos, perhaps.
When the world around
Maybe
her
some of
felt
her
dark
school
and
papers
hopeless,
or Tom's
she would
baby
draw
clothes.
and paint pictures
But she
filled
tried
with
not to
light
hope
and
for
beauty.
too much.
She painted
After all
sunny
these years,
gardens
her
and
special
happy
drawing
families.
was probably gone
She drew
forever.
houses with red
On
roofs
Saturday
and yellow
morning,
walls.
Emma
just
drove
like
out
the
of
one in
London
her lost
toward her
drawing.
old hometown.
She painted scenes
As she
of
got
people
closer,
laughing and
her
children
hands
playing.
began to shake on
Her
the
art
steering
teacher,
wheel.
Mrs. Wilson,
She had not been
noticed
back
how
to Maple
hard
Street
Emma
since
worked
the
and
day
how
they moved
talented
away.
she was becoming. becoming. When Emma turned
Mrs.
onto
Wilson
the
was a
familiar
kind
street,
woman
she
with
was
gray
amazed
hair
at how
and
different
paint-stained
fingers who truly
the
cared
houses
about
were
her
all
students.
freshly painted.
Emma has a
The
real
gardens
gift,
were neat and full
Mrs.
of flowers.
Wilson told Margaret
New
when she
cars
came
sat
to a
in
driveways
driveways
that had once been
She should
cracked
think
and
about
weedy.
applying for
The
the
whole
art
neighborhood
scholarship
looked
at the
prosperous
university.
and cared for.
With her talent
Number
and her
42
hard
looked
work, I
completely
think she could
different
get
too.
in.
What
Emma
had
had
once
never
been a
thought
small,
about going to
shabby house was
university.
now painted
Her
bright
family
white
had
with
no
blue
money for
shutters.
such things.
The garden
But
was
Mrs.
beautiful,
Wilson
with
explained
rose
that
bushes
scholarships
and a
were
neat
given
lawn.
to students who were
Emma
very
could hardly
talented
believe
but
this
could
was
not
the
afford
same
to pay
place
for
where she had
school.
lived as a child.
From that day forward,
Mrs. Henderson
Emma
was
worked
waiting
harder
for
than
her
ever.
at the front door.
She spent every
She was
free
a woman
moment
about
drawing and
Margaret's
painting.
age, with gray
She
hair
created
and
a
a friendly
portfolio
smile.
of her best artwork.
Next to her was a dusty
She stayed
cardboard
after
box.
school to use the
You
art
must
room
be
supplies
Emma,
because she could
Mrs.
not
Henderson
afford to
said
buy her
warmly.
own.
I'm
When
so
other
glad you could
teenagers
come.
her age were
This
thinking
box
about
was
parties
tucked
and
away in the
boyfriends,
far corner of
Emma
the
was
basement,
focused on her
behind some
future.
old pipes.
She knew that
We
education
almost missed
and
it
art were her
completely.
way out of poverty. They were her chance to build a better life for herself and maybe even help her family. Years passed, and Emma grew from a child into a young woman. She became the top student in her art class and one of the best students in her whole school. Teachers praised her dedication and talent. When Emma was 18 years old, she received wonderful news. She had won a full scholarship to study art at university. All her hard work had paid off. She would be able to go to university without her family having to pay anything. The night before Emma left for university, something magical happened. For the first time in many years, her father sat down with her in their tiny living room. Tom was asleep in his bed,
and Margaret was washing dishes in the kitchen. James looked older than his years. His hair had gray streaks and lines of worry marked his face. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard physical work. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I'm sorry. I know I have not been a good father to you these past few years." Emma felt tears start to form in her eyes. She had waited so long to have a real conversation with her father. "I was so worried about keeping us alive, about paying the bills and putting food on the table, that I forgot how to live," James continued. "I forgot how to be the father you deserved." Emma reached out and took her father's rough, work-worn hands in her own smooth young hands. "Dad, you gave me everything that mattered. You taught me to work hard and never give up. You showed me that love." Emma's hands were trembling as she took the box. It was heavier than she had expected. "We almost threw it away," Mrs. Henderson said again. "But my husband insisted that these old family things might be important to someone." Emma thanked Mrs. Henderson and carried the box to her car. She was almost afraid to open it. What if there was nothing important inside? What if her hopes were raised for nothing? Sitting in her car on the street where she had once been so happy, Emma slowly opened the cardboard box. The smell of old paper and dust rose up to meet her. On top were some of Tom's baby photos, the ones Margaret had thought were lost forever. There were Emma's old school reports with gold stars and encouraging comments from teachers. There were recipes in Margaret's handwriting on scraps of paper, instructions for making birthday cakes and Sunday dinners. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked through these precious memories. But she kept digging deeper into the box, hoping against hope for one special thing. At the very bottom, wrapped carefully in an old tea towel that had once belonged to her grandmother, Emma found something that made her gasp out loud. It was her childhood drawing. The paper was yellowed with age and had a few small tears along the edges. The colors had faded from bright and cheerful to soft and pale. But there it was, exactly as she remembered it. The little house with the red roof and yellow walls. The stick figures of her family standing together. The garden full of flowers that looked like colorful scribbles. And at the top, in crooked letters written with such care by an 8-year-old hand, were the words, "Best Dad in the World." Emma sat in her car and cried like she had not cried in years. She cried for the little girl who had loved her father so completely. She cried for the man who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much for his family. She cried for all the years of struggle and pain, but also for the love that had never disappeared, even in the darkest times. The drawing was not lost after all. It had been waiting for her, safe in the darkness of that basement, for all these years. Just like her father's love had been waiting, even when life made it hard to see. Emma held the drawing against her heart and smiled through her tears. She knew exactly what she was going to do with this precious gift from her past. Emma sat at her desk in her London apartment, staring at the faded childhood drawing that had been missing for so many years. The paper was delicate and yellowed, but my husband insisted that these old family things might be important to someone. It was the most precious thing in the world. Henderson and carried the box to her graphic designer. She was almost afraid to open it. The best art supplies. What if there was nothing important inside? She decided to spend the next week working on something very special. Sitting in her car on the street where she had once been so happy, to restore her childhood drawing. Emma opened the cardboard box. Emma used the special tape to mend the small tears up to meet her. She worked slowly and gently, making sure not to damage the original artwork. Lost forever. Then she used professional techniques to brighten the faded colors and encouraging comments from teachers. The red roof became bright and cheerful again. There were recipes in Margaret's handwriting on little house glowed like sunshine. Instructions for making birthday cakes and colorful flowers in the garden looked fresh and new. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Emma was amazed at how much detail she had put into the drawing as an 8-year-old child. Every flower had a different color. Special thing. Each family member had their own special carefully in an old tea towel that had once belonged to her grandmother. In the center of the picture. Emma found something holding hands with the rest of the family. It was when the restoration was complete, the paper was yellowed with age and had a few small tears along the edges. She chose a beautiful wooden frame made from bright and cheerful to soft and pale. The frame was simple but there it was exactly as she remembered. The drawing forever behind the little house with the red roof and yellow colors fade again. The stick figures of her family standing together. She had another idea, something that would make this gift even more special. And using all her skills as a professional artist, such care Emma began to hold hand new painting. Were the words, "This would be a companion piece to go with her childhood drawing," and cried like she wanted to paint a portrait of her father as she cried for the little girl who had loved her father and worried man from her difficult childhood. She cried for the man who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much for his family. Emma worked for hours each evening after coming home from her struggle and pain. She mixed paints carefully to get exactly the right colors, even in the darkest times. She used the finest brushes and the best canvas money could buy. It had been waiting for her, safe in the darkness of that basement. Emma painted his face with love and respect, just like her father's. Showing the wisdom that came from years of hard work and sacrifice. Even when life made it hard to see.
His
Emma
hands
held
were
the drawing
rough and
against her
calloused
heart
from all
and
the
smiled
jobs he had
through her
worked to
tears.
support his family.
She knew exactly
Emma
what she
painted
was
them
going
as
to do
beautiful
with this
and
precious
strong.
gift from her past.
James's eyes in the painting showed the kindness that had never left him, even during the darkest and most difficult times. Emma painted a gentle smile on his face, the same smile she remembered from her childhood when he used to call her, "my little artist." Above her father's head, Emma painted something very special, an invisible crown. It was made of golden light that seemed to glow around him. This was the crown of a man who had sacrificed everything for his family. A man who had worked multiple jobs and gone without sleep to make sure his children had food and shelter. A man who deserved to be honored as a king. The painting took Emma almost 2 weeks to complete. When it was finished, she stepped back and looked at it with tears in her eyes. She had captured not just her father's appearance but his spirit. Anyone who looked at this painting would see a man of dignity, strength, and love. Emma had both pictures professionally wrapped in beautiful paper with silver ribbons. She could hardly contain her excitement as she planned her visit home. On a bright Sunday morning in spring, Emma loaded the 2 large packages into her car and drove to her parents' house. The sun was shining and the flowers in their small garden were blooming. Everything felt perfect for what she was about to do. James answered the door wearing his comfortable weekend clothes, old jeans and a sweater that Margaret had knitted for him. His hair was now completely gray, and his face showed lines of age and experience. But his eyes lit up with joy when he saw Emma standing on the doorstep. "Emma, what a wonderful surprise," he said, giving her a warm hug. Then he noticed the 2 large wrapped packages in her arms. "What is all this?" he asked, smiling with curiosity. Emma's hands were shaking with excitement and nervousness. "These are for you, Dad. For our whole family, really?" Margaret and Tom came to the door to see what was happening. Emma carried the packages into their cozy living room and set them carefully on the coffee table. "I want you to open this one first," Emma said, indicating the smaller package. James unwrapped the paper slowly as if he knew something important was inside. When he saw the beautifully framed childhood drawing, his face went completely white. He stared at it for a long moment without speaking. "How did you?" he began, but his voice broke and he could not finish the sentence. "I found it, Dad," Emma said softly, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "Mrs. Henderson, the woman who bought our old house, found it in the basement when they were renovating. It was never really lost. Just like your love for us was never really lost, even during the hardest times." James held the framed drawing in his trembling hands. He looked at every detail, the little house, the stick figures of his family, the crooked letters that spelled "Best Dad in the World." "Now open the other one," Emma whispered. With shaking fingers, James unwrapped the second package. When he saw the portrait Emma had painted of him, he gasped. In the painting, he saw himself not as he felt old and tired and worn down by life, but as Emma saw him. Strong, noble, and surrounded by light. "This is how I have always seen you," Emma said, her voice full of emotion. "This is who you really are. Not a man who failed, but a man who succeeded in the most important way possible. You kept our family together. You taught us to work hard and never give up. You showed us what love really means." James could not speak. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he looked from the childhood drawing to the new portrait and back again. Margaret put her arm around her husband's shoulders and she was crying too. Tom, now a young man of 15, stood quietly beside them with his own eyes wet with tears. "I cannot believe you saved this," James finally managed to say, touching the glass that protected Emma's childhood artwork. "I cannot believe it survived all these years." "Love always survives, Dad," Emma said. "Even when everything else falls apart, love finds a way." They spent the rest of that Sunday hanging both pictures side by side on the wall in the living room. The faded drawing from 8-year-old Emma, who had believed her father was the most wonderful man in the world. And the new painting from grown-up Emma, who still believed exactly the same thing. As they stood together looking at the pictures on the wall, James put his arm around his daughter. "You know what the most beautiful thing is?" he said quietly. "That little girl who made this drawing grew up to be exactly the person I always knew she could be. Strong, kind, talented, and full of love." Emma hugged her father tight. "I learned it all from you, Dad. Everything good about me, I learned from watching you." Looking at the 2 pictures hanging side by side, Emma realized something wonderful. The house in her childhood drawing had come true after all. Not the house with red roof and yellow walls, but something much more important. They had built a home together made of love, sacrifice, and hope. A home that could never be lost or taken away. The drawing that had begun as a simple gift from a daughter to her father had become something much more powerful. It was proof that love never dies,
that hope never fades, and that the bonds between family members only grow stronger with time and hardship. As the sun set on that perfect Sunday, the Thompson family sat together in their living room, looking at the pictures on the wall and remembering all the love that had carried them through the difficult years to this moment of joy and peace.